Inside Putin's crisis, fear, chaos, and desperation. The Kremlin is cracking from within. Putin is growing paranoid, fearing betrayal and a coup as his economy collapses and trust inside his circle fades. While Russia sinks deeper into chaos, the front lines are shifting. Ukraine is pushing forward, reclaiming lost ground and proving that Moscow's offensive power is running out. As the Russian army bleeds, the government throws money at desperation. Billions of rubles now go to recruiters paid to send more men into a war many no longer believe in. In the skies above Moscow, drones keep coming. On the ground, panic and propaganda are the only weapons left. Who is really pulling the strings inside the Kremlin? How long can Putin buy loyalty? And what's next for Ukraine's advance? All the details in our special edition of Hotspot. Putin is increasingly uneasy, facing growing tension within the Kremlin and fears of being pushed out of power. Economic troubles, political pressure, and cracks among his inner circle are adding to his anxiety. Even loyal officials are starting to question his leadership. Why is Putin so worried now? And what's really happening behind the Kremlin walls? Find out in our new report.
For almost a quarter of a century, Vladimir Putin has been building a system of personal power in Russia, a totalitarian state where any dissent is punished and fear is the glue that holds the regime together. But today, this monolith is beginning to crack. The Russian dictator is in a panic, afraid of losing his grip on Russia. As the Telegraph writes, the bunker dweller carefully protects his regime from any threats. Recently, the FSB accused Mikhail Khodorkovsky and 22 other members of the Russian anti-war committee of preparing a coup d'etat. According to the security service, the organization is allegedly planning a violent seizure of power and the overthrow of the constitutional order.
This tells us that the Kremlin is paranoid. Putin is searching for enemies in an attempt to strengthen his regime. John Herbst, senior director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council and former US ambassador to Ukraine.
After spending 10 years in a Siberian prison, Khodorkovsky was released in 2013 and fled to Europe, where in 2022 he founded the Anti-War Committee. In an interview with The Telegraph, he stated that the FSB's accusations are a reflection of the Kremlin's fear of the future and the issue of the transfer of power.
What do we have in Russia? A prime minister whom no one elected, but who was appointed by Putin. Courts appointed by Putin. A parliament whose seats were filled as a result of fraudulent elections and in whose legitimacy no one believes. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, Russian entrepreneur and publicist.
They couldn't care less about the liberals who fled after being neutered. They're not afraid, not in the slightest. They're afraid of each other. Of the same kind of predators. Those who circle around you, smile in your face every day, and swear loyalty. Those are the ones who can do something. And Putin knows this perfectly well. And Prigozhin's mutiny, even if it was staged, clearly showed that no one is going to defend him. Neither the National Guard, nor the police, nor the rank and file, nor the generals. No one cares, no one gives a damn. And that's why Putin is afraid.
And indeed, fear becomes the key word. The dictator is cornered and the economic situation only heightens the anxiety. Russia's Minister of Economy Maxim Reshetnikov has admitted the country is on the verge of a recession. The banking system is suffocating under the debts of defense enterprises. According to Harvard analyst Craig Kennedy, $190 billion in loans have been issued to defense industry companies without guarantees. And now this bubble could burst at any moment. Moreover, Ukrainian drones have destroyed more than half of Russia's oil refineries, forcing the country into huge lines at gas stations and causing a fuel shortage. And new sanctions from across the ocean have only intensified the blow. Donald Trump imposed the most painful restrictions since the beginning of the war. The giants Rosneft and Lukoil have come under attack. Now China and India are reducing their purchases of Russian oil. Almost 3 million barrels per day are at risk, and along with them, half of the Kremlin's revenues. But Putin fears not only internal threats, but external ones as well. The dictator is pulling more and more air defense systems toward the Kremlin. There are already 5 layers of defense around the capital. Panzer, S-300 and SE-400 systems are being brought in from all regions.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
The fire of retribution has reached Moscow. Ukrainian drones have struck the capital and its outskirts, breaking through the illusion of safety in the very center of Russia. Explosions, panic, and rising smoke have filled the night sky as air raid sirens echo across the city. And this is only the start. More precision strikes are on the way. Full details in our next report.
Pickup trucks with machine guns mounted on their roofs along the perimeter of the Kremlin. It's unlikely that Putin and his generals expected to see such a scene in the 4th year of the war. This past weekend, Moscow and the surrounding region came under a massive drone attack. At night, Domodedovo and Zhukovsky airports were temporarily closed. By morning, their operations had been restored. In the Kommunarka area, explosions were heard during the attack and smoke was seen rising above the forest. All night, Moscow Mayor Sobyanin wrote in his Telegram channel about drones being shot down. Other Russian public channels also reported on the large-scale drone attack.
The AFU are trying to launch a massive attack on Moscow and the region. Within a couple of hours, 14 drones heading for the capital were destroyed. Explosions in the sky were heard in Domodedovo, Podolsk, Dubna, Ramenskoye, Kommunarka, Troitsk and Kolomna. At Zhukovsky and Domodedovo airports, 5 flights were cancelled and 6 were rescheduled. Restrictions on departures and arrivals have been introduced. In
the Moscow region, a massive fire broke out at the Serpukhov oil depot as a result of drone strikes. The Russian Ministry of Defense reported that nearly 200 attack UAVs were shot down overnight.
This is not the first time that Russians themselves have recorded more than 40 drones heading toward Moscow. We're trying to bypass the capital's air defense system, which is now deployed directly there. But we understand that all of this is in place. These are specific retaliatory strikes and probing actions, probing to see how to deliver a more effective combined strike.
Recently, Western media published a map of the air defense systems protecting the Russian capital. But even through such dense protection, Ukrainian drones managed to slip through. Because of this heavy protection of Moscow, other regions and strategic facilities across Russia are suffering.
Analysts note that the systems are constantly being moved around, but the majority are concentrated around Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Putin's residence in Valdai. There simply aren't enough systems to protect oil refineries and other strategic facilities in the regions. This is exactly what the Ukrainian armed forces are taking advantage of. In
the Moscow region, explosions were heard near the airfield where Russia's strategic aviation is based. The Sheikovka Strategic Aviation Air Base and Kaluga Airport in Russia's Kaluga region were also under attack. This is not the first massive drone attack on Moscow and other regions. Even though the Russian Ministry of Defense always underreports the number of drones, almost 200. That's quite a lot, and their number will only continue to grow.
This has a very serious anti-propaganda effect, especially for the Kremlin. Let me remind you that one of the reasons for launching the so-called special military operation was the issue of guaranteeing the security of the Russian Federation itself, as Putin and his inner circle explained it. We are seeing how the war is coming directly to Moscow. And not just to Muscovites. We see that the geography of Ukraine's drone attacks is expanding.
Before the start of the so-called special military operation, drones did not terrorize ordinary Russians, let alone Muscovites. Now, however, air raid alerts throughout the night are becoming a routine occurrence for Moscow. And perhaps now Russians will have questions and complaints for the master of the Kremlin.
As Russian forces continue to throw wave after wave of unsuccessful assaults, Ukraine's armed forces have shifted decisively to the offensive. Step by step, our defenders are taking back ground that once seemed unreachable. Within just 24 hours, Ukrainian troops liberated 3 settlements, pushing the enemy back and strengthening new positions on the front. Their advance is steady, coordinated, and unstoppable, a clear sign that the initiative now belongs to Ukraine. See the full story of how this breakthrough unfolded in our latest report.
The Ukrainian armed forces are advancing against the enemy in giant strides, at least by Kremlin standards. While Putin's army spends months fighting for every village, our defenders are achieving what once seemed impossible. In just a single day, they managed to recapture as many as 3 Ukrainian villages from the Russian army. We're talking about the settlement of Sukhitskoye and 2 other villages in the Pokrovsk direction, Kucherov Yar and Uyut.
Thus, as of August 21st, 2025, the situation in this sector has been stabilized. Control has been restored over 9 settlements, and another 9 have been cleared of enemy sabotage groups. In just the past 10 days, 1,756 enemy soldiers and 75 pieces of enemy equipment have been destroyed here.
The occupiers also suffered huge losses in their attempt to break through the Ukrainian front line in a neighboring sector of the front. For example, fighters of the 33rd Brigade repelled a massive mechanized assault in the area of Vladimirovka, Donetsk region. During the battle, the weather conditions were poor, which did not play into the occupiers' hands. At least 3 enemy armored vehicles got stuck in the swamp, and the infantry that began to disembark from them came under fire from artillery drones. At one point, even a HIMARS joined in to repel the Russian attack. As a result of the battle, the enemy lost 3 armored vehicles destroyed, 3 drowned, and most of their infantry. Nevertheless, the Russian army does not give up hope of breaking through our defenses at least somewhere along the front at any cost, even if it means hundreds or thousands of their soldiers killed.
Every day, basically, there is news that the armed forces have locally pushed out the enemy here or liberated territory there. In all directions, essentially, they are repelling some large-scale enemy attacks. Every day, dozens of attacks are carried out in different directions.
The enemy is especially desperate to drive the armed forces of Ukraine out of Pokrovsk. Enemy sabotage groups have been storming the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces there around the clock without stopping for the past several days. The situation in this direction remains extremely difficult for the Ukrainian armed forces. Nevertheless, despite all the enemy's efforts, our defenders are bravely holding the defense of Pokrovsk.
The defense of Pokrovsk has been holding for over a year now. Over a year, just think about it. How many thousands of Russians have died there? Losses exceed 200,000. These are officially confirmed losses, according to figures from foreign intelligence agencies. Another question, how much Russian equipment have Russian generals lost in this direction? The generals have lost their epaulets.
The Pokrovsk direction is the main topic of conversation for Russian propaganda. But when it comes to their so-called achievements on other parts of the front, Kremlin propaganda prefers not to talk about it. You're unlikely to see footage like this on TV across the border. Within minutes of detection, the border guards from the Guard Brigade's reconnaissance and strike UAV groups completely destroy yet another enemy position. As a result, the occupiers lost at least 2 of their tanks, a vehicle, an antenna, electronic warfare equipment, and a significant portion of their personnel in the southern Slobozhanshchina direction. Despite all their efforts, the Russians have not managed to achieve a single significant victory, either on the ground or in the air. The only thing the occupiers seem to excel at is creating weapons of mass terror against civilians. A vivid example of this is the barbaric raid on wind turbines near Kramatorsk. These are clearly civilian critical infrastructure facilities. In this way, the Russians destroyed a 3rd wind power station in Kramatorsk. Previously, the occupiers attacked wind turbines on October 22nd and 24th. Endless air raids on Ukrainian cities may become the Kremlin's new tactic. To this end, Russia is actively testing more and more new types of its own drones. For example, UAVs with a ring wing. An unusual enemy drone was detected by a Ukrainian anti-aircraft drone. Its exact purpose has not yet been determined. However, it is assumed that it could have performed both reconnaissance and strike missions. Overall, in just the past week alone, the enemy has sent at least 1,200 UAVs toward Ukraine, dropped more than 1,360 guided aerial bombs, and used more than 50 missiles of various types.
Every strike by Russia is an attempt to inflict as much harm as possible on ordinary life. This week, these are strikes on residential buildings, on our people, on children, on civilian infrastructure. This is the main target for the Russians. Thousands of strikes with different types of weapons in just 1 week.
However, military analysts assure that Ukraine's response to Russian terror is also not far off.
Ukraine was, is, and will be, and sooner or later, Ukrainian Tomahawks will definitely meet Russian decision-making centers.
While the American Tomahawks are still on their way, the Security Service of Ukraine has shown off its own new developments.
We are handing over this remarkable Magura B-7, which has already achieved a number of victories.
The drone was purchased with donations from Ukrainians as part of a large-scale fundraising campaign joined by local artists, influencers, and athletes.
This strike marine drone is the first in the world to have destroyed aerial targets.
Thanks to just one such marine drone, the occupiers can potentially suffer tremendous losses, which the SSU promises to report in its upcoming video updates.
Ukraine is steadily preparing Crimea for the occupation. For Russian settlers and collaborators, life and work in Crimea are becoming unbearable. Diesel fuel has already disappeared from gas stations, and precise Ukrainian strikes on Russian military radar systems are paving the way for further destruction of the occupiers' fuel and military infrastructure. Each successful operation tightens the noose around Russian logistics on the peninsula. What awaits both residents and occupiers in the near future, and how Ukraine's systematic campaign is turning Crimea from the fortress into a trap? Up next.
After a hard, long, and exhausting journey, filled with many challenges and moments that tested their endurance and spirit, Crimea and Sevastopol are now returning to their home harbor, a place that has always symbolized safety, belonging, and the comfort of familiar shores.
And that harbor is Ukraine. Crimea is being cut off from the Russian Federation, and the collapse of the Crimean Bridge is just a matter of time, according to Western publications. There is already a total fuel crisis on the peninsula. Some areas have been left without electricity. There isn't enough air defense even for the most important sites, and those that remain in the chaos are now shooting down their own planes.
We note that as a military base, Crimea is becoming more and more inconvenient for Russia because there is no water.
So, the past few days have marked a new reality of life on the peninsula. The key event was a series of strikes in the area of Vardiska, where after precise hits, a massive explosion broke out. This is the largest oil depot in the area. According to locals, the burning depot in Vardiska could be seen from the suburbs of Simferopol, with the glow visible for many kilometers.
In Vardiska there were strikes not only on the oil depot but also on the military airfield, as well as on the Russian garrison station there.
According to information circulating online, an ammunition depot on the garrison's territory was also hit. In addition, the oil depot near Feodosia has also partially ceased operations. Due to several attacks just this month, 11 fuel tanks have been completely destroyed, as confirmed by satellite images.
Why is the story about the Feodosia oil depot so important? It's not just that it burned down on its own, it burned down with the fuel that was stored in those tanks. And that will be very difficult to restore. It's unclear what exactly was there. Diesel fuel or gasoline. But if it was gasoline, which is most likely, it means that the crisis this week in occupied Crimea will be much worse than it was the week before. So we wait.
At the same time, each such strike is notable for the fact that it's almost impossible to extinguish the fire. Experts say, the burning fuel spreads across the facility, igniting neighboring tanks, and so the fire can go on for days.
The landscapes of Feodosia adorn almost the entire eastern part of Crimea. They say the flames can be seen from 30 and in some places even 50 kilometers away. Everything, it is said, is burning to the ground. The facility needs to be shut down. This is a recommendation for the occupying Crimean authorities, who have also confirmed that there will be no gasoline.
There will be no diesel either, local authorities add. Local activists report that since the beginning of the week, diesel fuel has also disappeared in Crimea. Under these circumstances, the promise of the head of the occupying Crimean administration, Sergei Aksyonov, to stabilize the fuel supply situation is simply impossible to fulfill, added Z propagandist Alexander Sergeyev. At the same time, the authorities are desperately trying to conceal the real picture of what is happening in Crimea. Thus, just over the past weekend, police officers drew up at least 4 administrative reports against residents of the peninsula for posts on social media. People in particular were outraged by the lack of fuel. Interestingly, Russians themselves are partly helping the Ukrainian armed forces to identify targets in Crimea. Experts have analyzed that now these targets can be found simply by opening maps on the internet.
Remember when Yandex Maps started blurring all sorts of strategic sites? I said that now it's absolutely clear where exactly to strike. Well, my friends from Inform Napalm noticed that the Special Operations Forces did exactly that. The territory of the oil depot in Gvardiskoye was blurred on Yandex, but for some reason that didn't help against the strikes. Mystical. Once again, thanks to all the Russian decisions that help increase the effectiveness of Ukrainian strikes, blurring military sites on Yandex Maps is definitely one of them.
Another decision that has contributed to the irregular strikes in Crimea is the work of the defense forces targeting Russian air defense sites on the peninsula. For example, the day before, the main intelligence directorate managed to strike the occupiers' newest radar system. We're talking about the Valday complex, which was developed to detect small drones.
The security service of Ukraine continues to systematically reduce the enemy's military, logistical and economic capabilities to do anything, both in occupied Crimea and in other occupied territories, and even on Russian territory itself. But Crimea suffers the most because the air defense system there was deliberately destroyed, their ability to defend themselves was reduced, and now we are working as if inside the body.
By the way, so that the occupiers in Crimea don't get the impression that everything will still work out, along with oil depots and military equipment, the Ukrainian armed forces also didn't forget about the equipment that supplies electricity. Russian bases. In several regions of the peninsula, Ukrainian defenders organized blackouts.
At night in Crimea, several electrical substations were put out of commission. And in particular, the main power substation in Jankoy, or Jankong, as we used to call it in Crimea. So now rolling blackouts are being introduced. And here Putin is being shown in very concrete terms, yet again, that if he continues to strike Ukraine's energy infrastructure, the occupiers in Crimea will be left without electricity and fuel.
And the cherry on top? During one of the latest attacks, the Russian air defense crews got so nervous that they started firing at everything in sight. As a result, one less Russian fighter jet worth about $50 million.
During a nighttime attack by Ukrainian drones, Russian forces shot down their own Su-30SM aircraft. This happened right in the area of the Gvardeyskoye airfield.
At the same time, there's no good news for the occupiers when it comes to air defense. Analysts note that recently there have been more strikes on Russian territory itself, prompting a decision to partially redeploy air defense systems from Crimea back to Russia for protection.
Bring a friend, earn $500,000. That's a cynical slogan behind Russia's massive recruitment campaign for the war in Ukraine. Moscow is spending billions to lure new soldiers to the front, offering huge payouts to recruiters across the country. In 2025 alone, these recruitment bonuses have already surpassed 2 billion rubles. The record holder is the Saratov region, where local agents have pocketed around 400 million rubles for signing up new men to fight and die in Ukraine. More on this in our next report.
At first, they are heroes, ready to serve their homeland with faith and truth.
What is respect, honor, dignity, courage, and defending the homeland? I know these things firsthand.
But as soon as they end up at war, disappointment overwhelms them.
Never go to the SO. You will end up there. So many people we've lost, it's just...
There are fewer and fewer people in Russia willing to fight.
My head got straightened out pretty quickly. It took me literally 3 or 4 months to fully grasp the reality of the situation. Yeah, I'd rather get locked up, go to prison or whatever, but I'm not going there.
To somehow save the situation, Russia decided to lure in recruiters. The opportunity to earn money by sending someone else to war became available to Russians in the summer of 2024.
The situation is really that bad, and in fact, Putin's main task now is, today, it's to increase the number of cannon fodder, which he doesn't have enough of at the front. And for this, such utterly inhumane and completely unacceptable methods are being used, where in these situations, one person, as they say, rats out or betrays another individual, often without any regard for the consequences. There are also horrifying stories about neighbors, and even worse, when a wife might turn in her own husband, or the most terrible of all, a mother turning in her son, yes, and getting money for it.
By October 2025, every third region had officially introduced payments for recruiters.
They are essentially selling people as slaves. It's a kind of slave trade, a new kind, which is flourishing in Russia today. But again, there's nothing surprising about it, because exactly the same methods that existed during the era of slavery are thriving in Russia today.
No less than 2 billion rubles have already been spent from regional budgets. Most regions had to use money from their reserve funds for this. And all because there is simply no one left to fight.
Because now everyone understands that, in reality, people are being sent to slaughter. There's an old saying, a St. Petersburg saying from the days of Banditsky Petersburg from the 1990s. Gurov doesn't have a wallet. And apparently people understand this very well now. What's the point of millions if you're a corpse? You definitely won't need them anymore.
The leader among recruiters has become the Saratov region, There, they spent 400 million rubles from their reserve fund on them. A comparable amount was allocated by local authorities in 2025 for the construction of apartment buildings.
Putin doesn't care about people at all. Putin has been in power for 25 years. Among those years, there were times when Russia was awash in oil revenues, and yet the emergency housing still hasn't been resettled. To this day, there are people in Russia, maybe not many, but there are some, who live in barracks. Barracks that are falling apart, where the sewage system has failed, where the electricity is constantly short-circuiting. These barracks, for example, are standing without any foundation. People are simply living in appalling conditions. But Putin doesn't care about the people.
But that's not all. In regions where the plan to recruit people for the war has failed, the authorities are willing to pay 500,000 rubles to those who can bring in as many residents as possible.
There's always the printing press, so they can print as much money as they want. The other thing is, when this printed money isn't backed by anything, you can pay it out. But then you just won't be able to buy anything with it in the store. That's true. But for now, people haven't realized yet that inflation will be enormous, so they can still be bought with these payouts.
And now the latest news. The State Duma has passed a law on year-round conscription for military service. Apparently the recruiters just can't cope. Or maybe there's simply no one left to recruit.
The federal law was passed unanimously. Congratulations, esteemed colleagues.
At this moment, that's all from me, Maria Ferfonova. Even more hellish Frontline news in our next episode. But for now, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon!